Hello and welcome to Spectator TV. I'm Natasha Feroze, head of TV at The Spectator, and today we're going to be talking about British Airways. Once described as the nation's favourite airline, it has since been on a bit of a downhill trajectory. Now, to discuss this, I'm joined by one of our favourite contributors, Alexander Larman, who is also the books editor for Spectator World magazine. Alexander, thank you for joining me. Now, you've written this piece on our website about how the demise of British Airways is a parable for modern Britain. How bad is British Airways at the moment?
Hi, Natasha. Well, I had the misfortune of travelling on British Airways last year, and I can honestly say that it was an absolutely substandard experience. It was only a relatively short flight, a 3 hour flight to Italy, but everything about it was awful because what they are offering is a budget service at a premium price. It's uncomfortable, it's cramped, it feels compromised, the staff are rude and unfriendly, there's a lot of queuing, a lot of waiting around, flights are invariably late, and you are paying hundreds and hundreds of pounds for the privilege. And the trouble is that BA is, and I'm going to put this advisedly, it's coasting on former glories. It is not an airline that anybody would actually want to travel with these days because it's lousy. People give Ryanair a lot of stick, and rightly so, but Ryanair doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is. It's a budget airline, and it's a very, very cheap airline. And if you're going to suffer, you're going to suffer for not much money. But BA, you're going to suffer, and you're going to pay quite a lot of money for the privilege because over the last 20 or 30 years, they have been gradually stripping away every single thing that made it a desirable way to travel. They've taken away things like food on board, they've taken away things like checked baggage for free, and essentially you are paying a lot of money to have a not very pleasant experience. And the question that I would ask is why does BA think it has a God given right to exist? Why does it think that it has the ability to get people to pay a lot of money to travel in severe discomfort? And the answer is, I don't know anymore, because we have other options. This is not the era of monopoly. If you want to travel anywhere, there are many, many other airlines, better airlines, that are going to take you there. And it's no wonder that BA constantly is ranked in the worst of the airlines in the world. It is an international shame, and we should all be embarrassed by it.
And it's actually interesting you compare it to Britain. Similarly, lots of people in Britain are fleeing to Dubai, and in the same way, they are fleeing to Qatar Airlines or Emirates Airlines.
Well, that's absolutely true, isn't it? Because I think that a lot of people who have been living in this country have just thought over the last couple of years, especially, why am I still here? And it's so sad for me because I'm somebody who loves Britain. I love Britishness. I love everything about this country. But I increasingly feel that my great love of Britain is not reciprocated. It's a very unrequited love because we are constantly supposed to put up with stuff we shouldn't have to put up with. Everything in this country is too expensive. Everything in this country is dirty. It's cramped. We are constantly undergoing privations we shouldn't have to undergo. And so BA is essentially the country in airline form. And that's so depressing as an idea because BA used to be great. It used to be something which was the envy of the world. One thing that I said in the piece was if you go back to Hugh Hudson's famous adverts for it in the 80s and 90s, there was a real sense of excitement and glamour. If you saw the BA flag flying from an airline in the sky, you would feel this almost sense of patriotic excitement. Now you just feel shame. You think, well, those poor people having to travel in such a horrible, substandard way.
Do you think British Airways has made any sort of marketing decision to remove the Britishness from its brand in as much as they can? Because even British Airways isn't proud to be British.
No, and this has been the problem. I feel that over the last decade, especially, Britishness has become a dirty word. We are ashamed of our country. We are ashamed of the connotations with our country. And this is something which is truly appalling. I mean, the reason why we see the rise of parties like Reform is that they are saying it is not shameful to be patriotic. It is not shameful to actually be proud of the country in which you live. Whereas British Airways, if they could change their name to something else, I'm sure they would, because let's not forget, they are owned by a Spanish company, by Iberia, and so they are not anymore this thing we should be proud of. It isn't as if the taxpayers' money is in any sense subsidising BA. But I mean, there is a part of me that thinks, couldn't we nationalise it? Couldn't we bring it back into national ownership? Except, of course, the difficulty is, imagine the current government owning BA. Half the flights would probably crash within a week.
Yeah, I would like to push back slightly, Alexander. Brits, I mean, they do love to moan, don't they? And they always have done. Have been on several flights on Ryanair, EasyJet, and British Airways, and you hear people grumbling, getting on the plane. They say, "I'm never going to fly Ryanair again. I'm never going to fly EasyJet again." They always will. And is this just not a very British thing in itself that we love complaining?
Well, Natasha, I said about 15 years ago I was never going to fly Ryanair ever again, and I never have flown Ryanair ever again. So I like to think that I'm at least consistent in these things. You
Instead,
are
you went
right.
to British Airways.
Well, British Airways is slightly different because unfortunately, there are going to be occasions when if you need to be at a certain place at a certain time, it will only be a British Airways flight, which is going to get you to that place at a certain time. Doesn't make it good though. And of course, if your entire marketing strategy is basically saying to the poor unfortunates who are flying, well, you didn't have a better choice, did you? Then I would say that's not the best possible marketing strategy because we do have more choice than we used to. There are more airlines. Because what's interesting is I remember the old days when Virgin Atlantic and BA were actually seen as competitors. There was a real sense of them trying to outdo each other. There's no competition now. Everybody knows that Virgin Atlantic is so much better than BA. But if you actually said, would you rather fly transatlantic with Virgin Atlantic or transatlantic with British Airways? Nobody's going to say British Airways. And it's exactly the same thing if you're going down to any of the Arab states. If you're going to Dubai or Qatar or anywhere like that, you would fly Emirates, you would fly Qatar Air. BA is just not an option unless what it is for a lot of people flying is, let's be quite honest, you're not paying for your flights. Either your business is paying for it or you've accrued air miles or something like that. But the idea that I would spend my own money flying BA through choice is one for the birds, I'm afraid.
What are the solutions then? And do you think they match up to how to fix Britain as well? One of the things that immediately jumped to mind is in Britain, lots of people have started flag maxing, waving the flag everywhere, reclaiming that British identity. Do you think that British Airways could start with the same?
I think that British Airways not being ashamed of being British would be a good start. And I certainly think that the idea of not feeling that you have to apologise for incompetence would be a good start. Because ultimately, if you are operating an airline, you are operating a service and you should be offering that service. And it's costing a lot of money as well. It's an expensive service, but you should be operating it with a degree of professionalism. If it was like the NHS, if it was, I can't really imagine how this would work, but if it was a nationalised airline that our taxes were paying for, then you would perhaps be more understanding about its many failures and its many failings. But because we are paying a lot of money to travel by this not very competent carrier, I think that the criticisms that we make, and I mean, I'm not the only person making these criticisms, not by a long chalk, but I think that you are right. I think that a lot of people, including I think a lot of Spectator readers and viewers, would think that it is very hard to be proud of our country at the moment because we're not being offered very much ground. We're not being offered grounds for national pride. We have a government that doesn't know what it's doing. It is lurching from one catastrophe to another. We have an opposition that doesn't seem to have much more of an idea either. Although I must say, irrelevant for a second, but Kemi has got much better over the last few weeks. But leaving that aside, we also have a sense of not actually knowing what the future is anymore. And given that it seems that the world is in an increasingly febrile state and that we could be on the verge of World War III at any moment, and that we have a member of NATO that's just popping into other countries and removing its president and spiriting them away, we would like one thing that we could be proud of and one thing that could be stable. And I would love to be saying to you in a year's time, well, I retract my earlier comments about BA. They've really turned it around. They are now a national flag carrier bearing the flag that we can be proud of. But it's not going to happen, is it?
Well, Alexander, I know we recommend to our writers don't necessarily read the comments under your pieces because our Spectator readers are some of the smartest people in the world, but they can be quite mean sometimes. But I thought I'd read you a couple of comments. This is from James. Along with the decline in the economy, the NHS, the armed forces, the City of London, the police force, the railways, etc., the UK does seem to be in an unstoppable decline. And then another one from Angus. My experience of the recent BA flight was an entitled cabin crew who were there for health and safety, not to provide a service. The Soviet attitudes of BA, I fear, are undoable. You did write about the new boss who has come into British Airways and has taken a little bit of a different stance. He's accepted British Airways' failures. Do you think he might turn it around and offer maybe slightly larger water bottles to the economy clients and maybe a bit of a better snack?
Yes, well, the new CEO of BA, Sean Doyle, has said, we get it. We get that there are problems. We are going to fix them. Which, on the one hand, is fine. But then the reason why I wrote the piece was I saw the news that in business class, which you are paying a lot of money for, they are scrapping the cooked full English breakfast on their short haul routes. They are replacing it with what they call a continental breakfast, which practices it's a bit of pastry and a bit of yogurt. It's not the kind of thing which you'd expect to pay a lot of money for. And I should also say that Club Europe, on a lot of their short haul flights, is just the same as economy. There's no more legroom or anything like that. You're paying a premium, so you get this little bit of breakfast. And when you start scrapping that, you just think to yourself, but what's the point? And increasingly, that's what I think the problem with BA is, that you just think, what is the point? What are you doing? And I wish Mr. Doyle all the very best in turning it around, because just as I would love this country to come back to its former greatness, and I would love people to be, if you say at the moment that you're from Britain, the response people tend to say is, "Oh, I'm so sorry." That is shaming, and I can imagine it's much the same. But if I say to somebody that I've just flown on BA, "Oh, I'm so sorry," I would quite like a situation in life people don't feel sorry for me anymore. It might not happen for a while.
Mm. Lastly, Alexander, there was a rare moment of defiance by British Airways. Recently, it paused its sponsorship to Louis Theroux's podcast when Louis Theroux interviewed Bob Vylan, the rapper who chanted "Death to the IDF" at Glastonbury Festival. Is this sort of boldness the type of thing you would like to see more of?
I mean, I'm not really sure why BA is sponsoring Louis Theroux's podcast in the first place, if I'm being absolutely honest. I mean, I'm sure that they have this policy in place of sponsoring certain things, but I would prefer that rather than getting into spats about who Louis Theroux can and can't interview on his podcast, they start thinking about buying new planes, training staff who actually care about their customers, making sure that the in-flight food is of a decent caliber, making sure that the planes are comfortable, making sure that they can run on time as far as they can, and just generally doing all the things that any air passenger should imagine are their right. Because I don't think that you're asking for too much here. I think instead that what you want is for people to actually think of BA as a great British success story, and we are so very far from that. It's actually quite terrifying.
And I know I said lastly, but lastly, Alexander, you have got a new book coming out on David Bowie. And before we started this recording, you interestingly told me that he hated flying. So what do you think he'd make of British Airways now?
Yes, well, David Bowie was a man he had some eccentric views and opinions, but I think that his hatred of flying was actually one of his least eccentric views, because if he was touring, he would occasionally fly on a small private jet if he had to, but he preferred to take cruise liners and things like that. And I think to myself, it would be rather wonderful never to have to get on a plane ever again. So what I would like to say to Sean Doyle or anybody else at BA who's watching this is just make it better. I mean, it shouldn't be that hard. You should be in a situation that if you put the time and effort in that these things need, we could be having this conversation again in a year's time. And I would love to say, well, wasn't that amazing? Wasn't that a fantastic turnaround? But I don't think we will be having that conversation, unfortunately.
Bowie hated flying, but he was a huge fan of The Spectator, wasn't he?
Bowie was a great fan of The Spectator, and in fact, he was developing a musical at the end of his life, which he was going to call The Spectator, and it's going to be set in the 18th century. And I wish he'd completed it for exactly that reason.
Alexander Larman, I look forward to reading your new book, which was out last week. If anyone would like to read it, we will add it to the show notes. Thank you for joining me on Spectator TV.
Thank you very much.